Listen. There's something I wish to share with you.
At the moment I'm searching for a man cub.
Man cub? What man cub?
The one who's lost. Now, where do you suppose he could be?
Search me?
To complete this was to give a more... There's been a lot of rather serious stuff there regarding politics and all the rest of it. Things going on out there. Speak a little bit about on a more personal level. One of my interests in the ancients particularly, I'm very interested in the way that they thought, and it is very clearly an area that you can never prove. One of my... Behind that, I think it's very clearly obvious, well, if we go back to the Neolithic and before, they had fully developed minds physically. So they had the same ability, intelligence-wise, as we have. That's quite, to me, that's demonstrated. For example, when we look at cave paintings, those beautiful, stunningly beautiful cave paintings found in France, for example, sadly, they show, to me, when I look at them, I have the same thing when I'm drawing. There's a great desire to bring into being a perfect form, to illustrate the perfection of a dream inside your mind and to project it into reality. A certain kind of alchemy there. Being in the zone, in that place when you're trying to do that, when you're trying to create a perfect line, a perfect curve, trying to create a perfect form. That aspiration, being in the zone there. To me, that's very clearly that it's where sort of genius happens, in a way. You become more intelligent when your senses are fizzing and your mind is fizzing with its immersion in that world. To me, it's very clearly evident that those people painting in those caves were in that state, and they had all the intricacy and subtleties of that intelligence, that aspiration working in their minds, trying to create this perfect representation in these incredibly simple yet perfectly formed, beautiful animal paintings. So to me, I see great intelligence in the artistry and creative urge coming through from that, we might say, primal mind, human mind. There is great sophistication in it, in that way. Just as much sophistication as is in the contemporary human wishing to manifest something beautiful which is inside their mind. But something which in there has built and has come into my films to a degree is, I think that I suspect today, I don't think that they were actually exactly the same as us. It's often said, or it's sort of, there's one of these polarised arguments with whether primitive versus exactly like us, and I don't think it's either. I think, for me, I strongly suspect, in my purely conjectural way, but looking back and immersing myself in that area for a while, I get a strong impression, I think it follows, that they had minds which were much more graphical in their nature. They had intellects which were much more graphical. What I mean by that is today, with our ever increasing specialization through the last few thousand years, we've become incredibly literary in our in the formulation of concepts, in the way we think. We think in this incredibly literary way. We think in words and phrases, and we're always talking in words and phrases and communicating in these, yes, descriptive, literary manner. Whereas I think that more primal mind, those primal intellects, I think they had all the intelligence and subtlety there, but that actually I see a much more graphical intellect, in as much as they dealt, and I think it's very clearly evidenced that they clearly used symbols, and those symbols created analogies for stories, peoples, for they may have, certain symbols may have represented certain groups of people or activities, all the rest of it. So I think they actually may have directly thought and equated concepts in symbolic forms, and whereas today we translate symbols constantly, we take a symbol, and if we want to learn about it, we translate the symbol into a whole paragraph of words, and I think that's a modern occurrence that's flawed and will never really give an understanding. In its very nature, it's taking it's flawed in its translation, in as much as the translation itself renders that symbol, turns it into something it is not. It turns it into a concrete definition, a literary definition, and that's not what it is. It's a symbol. And I've thought about this a lot through my art, that I think symbols, I've started using symbols and interweaving them, for example, the dragon with my films, and I think that in that symbolic world, in playing with concepts that are summated in symbols, that creates a very different landscape of thought from those clearly defined, regulated literary descriptions. So in dealing with symbols, there is a lot of space there. They float in a space in our minds with that degree of uncertainty I mentioned before, which I think is very important, and so gives room for drawing links between them. That gives room for a great deal of creativity and new thought. Because it doesn't turn everything into, everything isn't constrained within these descriptions. So in that way, I think symbolic, graphical thought and the exploration of ideas through those graphical, symbolized means of communicating those ideas is much more, it gives room for so much more creativity. And it keeps things indefined to a certain extent. It forces the viewer again to draw their own conclusions rather than stating them and giving them a nice descriptive literary paragraph that they can memorize and parrot off. If you want to talk about the meanings you saw in a set of symbols, you have to, by nature, interpret it yourself. So I think that's part of the reason why symbols have become, I find that very interesting. And so in my films as well, it's something I kind of feel fits with the ancient subject matter that comes into my films a lot, the dolmens and things. Part of that way I've worked in those symbolic forms and things, it's because I actually think that is the way perhaps that their intellects worked to a degree. Obviously, that's evidenced in religion and all the rest of it, to a degree. But there's so much analogy and metaphor, and again, with this dogmatic way of thinking today, it's very poorly equipped for the subtlety of understanding those forms. So we get these ridiculous arguments occurring where people read what is very clearly meant to be an analogy for something which is very clearly meant to be an analogy for a spiritual journey, for example, and they say, well, this is clearly can't be true because Yes. Like the feeding of the 5,000 or whatever, turning water to wine. These things very clearly were meant as analogies that had a meaning then beyond the immediate journeys of the mind and soul and all the rest of it. So yes, I try to bring that into my films. To wrap that up, lastly, there was an amazing story I saw in video I saw of a fellow who went into a temple in India. I'm not a great sort of follower of Indian philosophy or anything. I'm British. Just by the by. That's a great fashion for that at the minute. And has been last century. That exoticism. They've got all the same problems we have, in my mind. But this fellow went into a temple and there was a sculpture there atop this little pillar. And the sculpture was maybe 3 or 4, it changed which way you look at it, number of human forms entwined in a sort of ball. And this sculpture, have you ever seen those pictures, I'm sure you have, where when you look at them, if you look at them one way, you see one thing, and if you slightly change your mindset or look at it in another way, it's something else entirely. One way it might be 2 people kissing, the other way it might be a vase, for example. The negative space, the silhouette, and can flip between the foreground and background. So you get 2 different images. Well, this sculpture upon this pillar in this temple was of a similar nature in that, and he described, at least the person who was making this video, he described how, to his understanding at least, this sculpture had been made so that it appeared differently and was and people at different stages in their life, people of different ages, would see something different in these entwined human forms. And so somebody, a child looking at it, would see a mother holding a baby with the father behind them suckling a baby, something, the mother suckling the baby, the father behind entwined. They would, with the child, they would see something like that in this sculptural form. An adolescent might look at it and see, with their dirty little minds, might see 2, a man and a woman entwined in coitus. A middle-aged person might see I can't remember all the different stages. It went, and maybe an elderly person would see somebody dying and their soul going into the underworld or something like that. It was these, so at each point in life you looked upon this sculpture and you saw something different, and it was designed in that way so that it gave something to everybody but had a different meaning to them all. And maybe only the old person would actually see the whole sense in it. I thought that was it really struck me that as an incredibly, I loved the sophistication of that. And it really got me thinking about the way of, that you can create multiple layers in one artwork that speak to different people who are at different levels of understanding. And I try to do that through my films to a degree as far as I'm capable, in as much as I layer in, for example, sometimes there are personal stories layered in which may be evident to people who've been through something similar but won't be really noticed to those who don't. There are little hints given to inspire certain thoughts through symbolism or other things. And yet that's not fully mapped out. I think in that, for me, it's with that realm of not trying to get everybody to understand everything all the time, and as well not giving these perfectly concluded sort of black and white statements all the time. Because I think as well there are times in our life where certain understandings, having certain things explained to us, will be meaningless because we simply don't have the foundations to really understand the importance or the meaning of it. This is why it's absurd today. You know, we shouldn't have teenagers telling older people what to do, because they haven't got the life experience to understand a lot of things. Yeah, so that comes into my films a lot. I think different layering things, and in that way trying to, I'm hopefully successfully or not, but at least trying to some degree to make something which will entertain, which might just be purely entertaining on one level, but which to somebody who's looking in a different way and who has certain understanding, they will be able to see and draw some deeper conclusions. Yes, I find that a very, very inspiring, interesting sort of area to explore. I've just finished editing my talk, and out there we go. Look at that. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Maybe this one will work well.
Well, that brings us almost to the climax of our trials. Will you please do the honour?
I've made this, in one sense, as something of a director's commentary to introduce the film I've been working on for the last few months. I've been giving it a rest for the last month, actually, because I've got rather stuck with it. But I want to publish it, and I think I might attach it here. I might publish them all separately also. But for those of you interested, I want to have this lead into the film I've been making, which will hopefully actually put what I've been talking about and actually show you now what all that amounts to, if anything. So yeah, this film is very much about in ways it illustrates my personal journey since lockdown, the journey of a wandering man. It begins with a translation of The Wanderer, which is actually an untitled poem, which was found in the Exeter documents. I can't remember the word for it. But it's thought to be probably a poem which came from an oral tradition stretching back probably around at least 1,000 years. And I found it amazing because I really identified with a lot of what he speaks about in my journey over the last few years. It just goes to show 1,000 years apart, people are still having the same experiences. We go through the same journeys. Yes, it goes round and round. So here for you, I hope you enjoy it. It's a half-hour long film. Come back and watch it if you don't have the patience. It's a proper film. The Many-Faced Wanderer. Shall leave you there. Till later. Thanks for watching. Stay dangerous, folks.
Cause we stay dangerous. You ain't catch a body, you can't bang with us. Check your resume, you wanna hang with us. They say they want war, keep that thing with us. Stay dangerous.
Always the lonely one endures, his mind anxious, awaiting God's mercy.
y gwynt o'r dwyrain, i'r storm o'r môr, holled y milltir wybren, a gwedded y daran ein côr. Llifed a gler gwangalon, a llyfed